I'll do it right now.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We've got Samantha Moe here. We've got Uzma and myself, Nikki, for Hold On to Your Kids. Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. This is part 4 of our book club, and I have to be honest, it is my favorite part. I'm so glad we were able to go live because we were having some crazy technical problems, both with Zoom and with Facebook. So we went to YouTube and it seems to be working out. So welcome, everybody. I'd also like to add that this book has been difficult to get through. Would you guys agree?
Yes, but part 4 really came through strong.
Yes.
So if you've been reading and you're not fully into part 4, it just gets really practical. It gave a lot of good ideas, and I felt the hopelessness that we were feeling in our last call. We knew it was coming. There was a turnaround, and sure enough, I feel like we got some good clarity and answers.
Absolutely. I was sharing with a friend who's also reading this book that, you know, if you went to Barnes and Nobles or one of the bookstores in the States, or if you're in Canada like myself and you went to Chapters Indigo, if you took this book off the shelf and only read part 4, you would get the most value, I think, of the whole book, because it was written by 2 Canadian psychologists. And some of what they give you is a lot, but Uzma and myself are both educators, so we kind of dig that stuff. But as a parent, I think if you started at part 4 and then kind of dug in, looking at the headings, the chapter headings, the subheadings, I think you'd be able to capture exactly what you want from this book without having to endure some of the real technical stuff. So yeah, following our book club is a really great way to get the Cliff Notes, or Coles Notes, we call it in Canada, version of this book. So if you just start at part 1, part 2, part 3, and then this one, part 4, I think you'll be all caught up without having to dig in like we have. Uzma, what was the most fascinating quote for you this time? Did you pick one?
Yes, I was just looking at, I'm going to read it. It's off screen a little bit. It's on page 187 of the book version that Nikki showed. And it says, dependence is transferred to the peer group because we are so focused on their socialization. In thousands of little ways, we pull and push our children to grow up, hurrying them along instead of inviting them rest. Maybe to rest.
So as soon as they're able to choose their own clothes, they're choosing their own clothes. As soon as they're able to feed themselves, they're feeding themselves without having a minute to continue to be cared for by us as the parent, is kind of what I get from that.
Yeah, I think of play dates, extracurriculars, and the pressure on parents to make sure their children are in these kind of activities, I think is immense. So most parents feel that if they're not doing these things like play dates and signing their kids up for every activity possible, it's been a real trend, I would say, for the last almost 2 decades. I've seen. Maybe it's just because that's the time my kids were growing up, but there is this pressure that you have to do this. And in this book, they kind of call out that and said, this is something that actually is counterproductive.
So just a moment to talk about the pressure, right? We haven't gotten to part 6, which is a postscript that involves, what social media has done to our culture. I don't mean that in a negative way. There's positives too, but for what we're talking about, there's things like, the Instagram party. Well, if everything is set up just for the picture, is that what really happened? So sometimes there's the FOMO, the fear of missing out, or, if all the kindergarten kids are having birthday parties at these big places that cost so much money, then when it's your child's turn, you feel pressured to keep up, right? So I think that there's this snowball going down the hill that has just picked up speed and pressure, and yeah. I remember when I was growing up, it was kind of like you get what you get and you don't get upset.
That's right. And this push is actually pulling our children away from us, because all these opportunities that are being created of, joining all these events.
And
What
extracurriculars and
yeah, what they're doing in the process of us joining that as parents, our children are not really connected to us. I think that's the main thing to kind of focus on at this point. The children are actually, we're creating great opportunities for them to socialize with peers, not us. So part 4 really focused on how to build attachment. And they actually listed in chapter 14, 4 steps. So maybe we can go over some of those.
that would be a great idea. It reminds me of, growing up, although we could play outside until the street lights went on, we had to be in for dinner. And we had to wash up before dinner. So when you got that, it's dinner, it meant you had to go take a shower and like get changed before we even ate. So I kind of think that we've lost a lot of that. But chapter 14, the 4 steps of attachment. And they called that the collecting dance. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the focus is how do we collect our children, knowing that we've created these opportunities where they're out and about. How do we come back and get together back with our children?
So number 1 was, and I may be paraphrasing here a little bit, get out of their face and into their space so that you're enjoying things together. And one of so we had said that part 4 has a lot of practical tips. It's what to do, right? Instead of, oh my gosh, how are we going to recapture our kids and, hold on to our kids? Now it's, well, here's what you can do. So this is really exciting. One of the things that I really loved was the tips like, whenever you've been separated, to have a special greeting. And it can be different for each of your kids or whatever, is comfortable or makes them happy or makes you happy. But it's with enthusiasm. And I remember hearing a quote once that, how did that quote go? It was something about what children deserve. And every time that they enter the room, do your eyes light up? As the grown up, whether you're a parent, educator, whatever you are, do your eyes light up? Are they important? Do they bring you joy? And are you showing that to them? Because sometimes it's like, yeah, hi, okay, go get your dinner. And you haven't even made eye contact, right? So making an effort for that.
That reminds me of something. I work at a small private independent elementary school. One of the things that we kind of put in our parent handbook, and I'm sure a lot of parents aren't aware of, and it's exactly this connection and reconnection after separation. We ask parents to be off their cell phones when picking up their children.
Wow.
And the idea behind that rule was that you're connecting back with your child who's been separated from you for maybe 6, 7, 8 hours almost. And so the thought was, if you're on your phone, and we see this constantly, parents are on, business calls or just other calls that they're on. And so when the child's getting in the car, like you said, look at them, smile. And they said it doesn't have to be elaborate. It could be a nod in the book. That's what it talked about. A smile, a nod, a hug. These are ways to connect. And you just see the kids' eyes light up too with the parents who are able to do that and are actually focused.
Yeah, there was another example in the book that I really enjoyed, and my son co-sleeps with us. He's still 11, and it's not all the time, it's whenever he feels like. And I keep saying to my husband, if the child wants to be with us, why are we saying no? Really, right? He's there for a reason. He's an independent kid. He's does well in school. He's really great at making, like, he does all the right things, but there's just something about his sensitivity where he wants to connect, and it's not necessarily talking nowadays, but it is snuggling up. And one of the examples that the book gave was to wake them up. So in other words, as parents, be ready and wake them up to create a routine. Sounds like Magic Lad, doesn't it? Magic Lad taught us these things, these foundational things. Wake up 10 minutes earlier and have some snuggle up time. Get in their bed or in a chair and just hug them, hold them, talk to them, make them have a nice, soft, warm beginning to their day. So I think they called that
interpersonal
bridge.
Sorry,
yeah, I was like, what a great phrase. I love that. The interpersonal bridge. It just starts your day up right.
And if you're a teacher, this is applicable to you too, because in the same area, it talks about how teachers, when you first collect your students in the morning, to have, some sort of a ritual. And we do see that in classrooms where teachers say, like, what kind of hello do you want? Do you want a high five? Do you want a fist bump? Do you want elbow? Yeah. So
Dance,
I
special dance.
dance, exactly. So the idea is we connect before we do anything else. And so that's really that out of the face and into their space. It's entering their space.
And making them feel important.
So the second step that was provided in forming attachment was provide something for the child to hold on to, which is again, you've got their connection, but maintaining that attention and showing interest,
In
right?
you. Yeah. So that was talking about physical affection, the warmth or the tone of our voice, and basically giving them that connection that we all as humans crave and deserve so that they don't want to let go. Or if they do let go, they want to come back, right?
Yeah.
That
And
warmth.
it cautions us not to overpraise. So it has to be authentic.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be over the top with rewards and things like that. It's, I think, like, did you say presence? Just being in their
That's a great word.
presence,
Yeah. Yes.
being present, and also just their presence is enough.
Yes. That's deep. That's deep.
Mhm.
Okay. So it has to be authentic. It has to be genuine. It has to have a flow. It has to be something that is felt and not forced. So you can't like overpraise the kid, oh my gosh, you're this, oh, and you're this, and that. They're like, whatever, I don't believe you. That's not authentic, right? And if you're an educator listening to this, you can head on back to chapter 2. There's some great tips in there for educators in chapter 2. Number 3, what is the third one?
It's about inviting dependence, which I thought is so counterintuitive to everything we promote in our society, is building independence of children. And it's kind of a shock if this is new for parents, because what do we do as parents as soon as our children are old enough to dress themselves, feed themselves, right? The whole idea of Montessori schooling, it's make them independent. Don't have them rely on you. And
Mhm.
I wanted to share what I thought was such a fascinating example. They said, if you are like wooing an adult in a relationship, you go out of the way and you say, like, adults never say, don't count on me. They usually, like, if you're courting somebody, if you're in a relationship, you're going to usually say, how can I help you?
Yep.
And
You can depend
adults,
on me. I'll take
yeah,
care of
I'll
you.
be there for you. Stand by me was the name of a movie, right? Like, lean on me, those kind of things. It's really saying, like, adults do this naturally for each other. We just did it right now when we were having technical difficulties
Mhm.
going on. We called up each other and we're like, how can I help? And but with children, the idea is opposite. Like, come on, you can do this. I know you can do it. And so um it's very different. And so they're in the book, they're saying invite dependence from children.
So I like how you said that that's counterintuitive because, my instinct as a parent is to think, that's going to be counterproductive. I've got 2 kids. I've got to get out here on time in the morning. I've got all about me instead of all about them. Right. So, feed yourselves, dress yourselves. If you give a kid an inch, they're going to take a mile. And all that is doing, as the book said, is that it's pushing them away from us, away from a dependence on their parents, and directly into peer groups. And we know from part 1, 2, and 3 what that causes. So we have to be careful about, demanding or expecting them to have too much responsibility too soon, because it really is our role or our job to help meet their needs, to create that dependence so that over time they will naturally get to the point of maturation. They'll naturally mature. And if we don't provide that, I'm going to call it a safe haven. That's my words, not the book's words. If you don't provide that nest or that warmth or that I want to be dependent on my parents, then you're pushing them into peer groups. They're going to fill that void somewhere else. Like, it's just a natural human instinct. So I think there was a quote on page 187. Do you have that by any chance,
I
Uzma?
think you're, if, is that the one?
That's the one you were talking about in a relationship. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it says if you're
I
wooing adults who don't need to, like, basically, we're there. That's what I was saying earlier. Like, we're there and we're willing to offer help. I think the one that stuck out for me is the very next page, and I can share that one,
Mhm.
which kind of talks about this natural instinct part that we don't have to make our children grow taller. We just need to give them food. Nature is free to do its job of maturing. And I just love that quote.
Yeah, that was my fascinating quote. I was like, this idea that parenting is an instinct, raising children is an instinct, being human is an instinct. It's all these other things that are interrupting that instinct that makes parenting feel harder, or even growing up feel harder. So I really like that. We don't have to do anything to make our children grow taller. We just need to give them food.
It did
Period.
give reassurance too, right? As a parent, like
Yeah,
if
it's
you are
awesome.
watching this, or if you're reading the book and feeling like, oh my gosh, just I don't even know how to do this attention part and gathering and collecting, it's too much because, like you said, I've got a lot of other things on my plate. It is very reassuring that it's let nature take its course, and you just have to do very little of being consistent and showing up half the time. That's half the battle.
Absolutely. What I really like about these 4 points is that it addresses a question that came up during part 3, which is, what if, parents are struggling and what do they do? And this part 4 is really answering what they do, and which is part 4 of the book. But this number 4, which is act as the child's compass point, was really poignant to me because I found so many personal connections. And it was really about the fact that you as parents have to do something to become their compass point, to be, this is the way we're going to go, this is how we're going to live our life, this is how we're going to have our relationship as a family. And it really brought up for me that it takes a village. I'm going to go back to that educator thing. Those kids who unfortunately struggle the most are the ones whose parents are the most disconnected. It's just an observation of mine after 14 years of being an educator. And those parents who are, how can I help? What can I do? What are you learning? What can we do to reinforce at home? And that's not from a let's do homework perspective. That's from a let's have a conversation with my child so we're on the same page perspective. Those children are more engaged in school. They're more involved in the different extracurricular activities that there are. And it really brings home for me the point that it really does take a village to raise children, and that village is not Instagram.
And we also pointed out that parents who have given up are not in this conversation. So here's another thing I wanted to offer is that if you're showing up for this book talk, if you're reading this book, you already are okay and you're ahead of the game. And that's giving you grace too as a parent. Like we know, and we've talked about it in the other 3 parts, that it doesn't always go smooth and you're going to feel frustrations, and that's okay. But if we remember like this quote that just give them food, nurture, right? The give them food part,
Be there.
yeah, be there, be present,
Yeah.
and feed them, love them, and that will solve a lot of the problems. It seems so basic, too basic, right? You're like, that's
Yeah,
not
it's
working.
like make space, right? Make space,
Yeah.
make the effort, have your compass guided in the right direction. And it's not about all the extra stuff, right? They're going to figure themselves out in terms of how they live and exist in this world as a human. But what they need from you is you. And that
Mhm.
seems so simple, but that's what they truly need. Yes, they need you to be an advocate, but that's not between you and your child. That's between you and other people in the world, right? Oh my goodness. So I remember thinking about, when I was a kid and how we used to have family dinners every day. And now maybe it's only Sundays, but we're doing our best. And I was thinking about how often I went back to the country that my parents brought me from. And I migrated to Canada when I was 4 years old, and I didn't go back until I was 16. And we were middle class family. We worked really hard for everything that we had. And we couldn't afford to take vacations. I think we went camping a couple times, but that's not a very expensive vacation. And for my sweet 16 birthday, what I wanted was to find my identity. I wanted to go back home. And I didn't go back until I was married. So that's it. I just went back once. Lisma, did you have any experiences like that? Like, did you go back
Yeah.
home to kind of not just the connection with the parent, but also the connection with the extended family. Did you have any?
Yeah, so it's great that you brought that up. It takes a village, it could look so different for everybody, but for Nikki and I, we found that we had a little bit of a common experience. Like she shared that she went back, home. I was born in Pakistan and I came here and migrated to the US when I was 9. My parents in those first 10 years went back every couple of years because their parents lived there. And that was like a reunion with my aunts and uncles and cousins. And so I was surrounded by people. I was oriented by, people who love me unconditionally. And so it's just really about the other part that stuck out in step 4, step 4 was acting as a child's compass, is that's where you gain the values. So the values come from you and who you surround your children with, and surrounding them with family, extended family, and sharing those cultural experiences. So giving that richness of the culture, like it has lasted a lifetime. I stopped, going. The last time I went was, I think 26 years ago, which is a huge time. But, I think those initial steps of connections with our culture and family really resonated and was the compass point that my parents provided. Like, this is important. So if you're not able to travel anywhere, because you might be like, well, great, I don't have any family anywhere else, or they're out of state, I can't get to them. The idea is, who can you surround them with that share your values, what you find important?
That kind of reminds me of traditions too, because our family, we always travel at Christmas time. We celebrate Christmas. And I remember saying to my husband, it's great when they're little because they get to meet all the aunties and uncles and all the different places. We went to England, we went to Amsterdam, etc., France, and throughout the Caribbean. But what are our traditions in our home? Well, Santa comes. I'm like, don't even. Right? Like, that's not a tradition. That's not sharing what's important to us as a family. That's not transferring our values. So then we started going every other year. And each year that we were home, we made a point of bringing together everybody and really showing that, it takes a village. Your village is bigger than you could ever imagine because you don't even know all of the family that you have just right here at home, never mind abroad. So that's something that we intentionally did. And kind of a transition, the Magic Lad Blueprint talks about optimizing routines. And I think that really shone true in part 4, not just in, waking up 10 minutes earlier and having a soft start to the morning where there's a loving, welcoming, you're awesome, let's get going for today kind of a beginning, and also an ending and an evening. But just in terms of orienting your child to you being their compass point, right? Or to our compass point, what we value, what our values are as a family. I remember, Uzma, you mentioning about, what if you went to a city where you didn't speak the language and you were lost, right? I'm gonna let you tell that story because that one really resonated with me.
Well, it's fascinating too, because now we have Google Translate. That really helps.
Yeah.
But if you go to a new place, you go to a guide. Like, if you're in a new city, in a new country, you're going to take a tour and you're going to ask for somebody who's from, like, a local who can orient you, right? The idea is they orient you to where your surroundings are. So in that way, like, what happens in that is, after you get that orientation from somebody wiser and more knowledgeable than you, it doesn't take long then for you to figure out your orientation and where you are in that space. So if we transfer that to children,
but you don't want them to leave, right? You're like, no, can I take you out for dinner? Tell me more.
I know you want the guide to stay, right? Because they're providing you so much clarity in a place of confusion. And so your instinct is to stay close. Well, the instinct at that point is, let me stay as close as I can to this guide because they're going to be helping me. So, I think that kind of metaphor or whatever analogy could be applied to children too, that if we stay close to children and provide them and be the guide, then it doesn't take long for children to know more about something than we do, right? If you're their guide and they're going along.
And even as they grow and learn and become independent, and are able to do things on their own, they can still reach back and check in, because my parents are my guide. My parents are my wisdom. My parents are the people that I like to ask for their opinion so that we can talk through my next step in life, right?
Mm,
My
absolutely.
daughter, for example, is in 10th grade, so she'll be heading off to university in 2 years. And when she was choosing her courses, she's like, "Yeah, I've got my 4 years planned, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Can I take a look?" She's like, "No, no, I got it." I'm like, "Well, here's a different perspective, right? When you go off to university, because she wants to be a judge, you want to study law, you're going to need certain courses. And we should look at the university websites and see what the prerequisites are, because that trickles down into what you take in high school. Otherwise, you're going to be doing summer school and trying to make up the stuff you need as prerequisites and perhaps lose a year." She goes, "What?" And her face just dropped. I'm like, "Think about it. Work smart, not hard. Go all the way to the end and work your way backwards." She's like, "Geez, mom, I'm so glad you told me that. I've got to take French
Wow. So
as a
that to
university
me,
course," right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and that to me highlights exactly what the book is talking about, to be confident,
Mhm.
assume your position as their guide and interpreter, and don't wait for the kids to show us that they're lost. And you did
Right.
exactly that, right? You kind of, because of your experience and knowledge about how this would work for her, you offered her some really key advice, and she seemed
And
really
maybe
receptive to it.
I could have been wrong. She could have been
Mm.
perfectly right, but it didn't hurt to say, "Here's another perspective." And for her to be open to hearing that, which is the point, right? If they are oriented to me as my children, they value what I have to say because they understand and know and value that I have their best interests at heart, despite my own many times.
Right, right.
Right? So if we can orient them to believing that we are their best resource, it just makes everything so much better for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think it's just, I know on page 191, it talked about just having the confidence of just thinking about it in the long term.
Yeah.
So, we have that phrase, the years are long, but what is it? I'm
Days are
forgetting.
short.
The days are short. It's this idea that, in a day to day, we get so bogged down with our routines and rituals that sometimes we lose sight of the goals
Yeah.
that we have as a family. So it goes back to, like, what do we value? How do we hold on to these connections and make them, overall give our children this feeling that we care. We really, really do care about them, and we want them to be in our hemisphere, in our sphere, and sometimes that can look messy, but this idea and notion is that we're the guides, we're confident, like that saying, fake it till you make it. Right?
Yes.
You might not really feel as a parent that you got this.
I sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
I remember our Magic Lad mentor colleague Mark talking about his son, who's early 20s, I think, and
Mhm.
some of the experiences that he had. If you've listened to some of our past book clubs, you'll hear what he shared. Hey, Mark, if you're watching. And what he really talked about was the fact that despite the fact that his child is no longer under his roof, he's still doing his best to be there for him in terms of having daily conversations, doing more listening than talking, right? Giving his child a chance to express what his interests are, express what his challenges are for a listening ear, because for his young adult, it's the safety. Again, that nest is what comes to mind again, right? So Mark was being his nest, even though it's by the phone, because it's our job as parents when we have children who are alienated or who are, just out where we don't want them to be. It's our job to win back their hearts and to win
Yeah.
back the relationship, no matter what it takes. And sometimes we need a piece of humble pie to be able to do that. So it's really important that we have that air of confidence, even if we are faking it till we make it. That was a good way to put it, and that we're not distracted from what our responsibility is, because the book talks about the fact that the more defiant and impossible children are, the greater their need to be reclaimed. Right? They're separated, they're oriented towards peers, but it's our job to restore our relationship as parents or as educators. Educators do this a lot. Every year there's someone who we just kind of take under our wing and kind of reclaim. And that really ties up chapter 14, I think.
Wow, that was a long recap, but that just kind of
Yeah.
tells you how much meat there is in that chapter. And it's really good advice. And it kind of does make you think about, what are you doing that's working according to these guidelines and advice, and where you have room to grow. So I hope it leaves you as the readers with some action steps, and also feeling like, yes, it's, some of it's just my intuition.
Yeah. And I think we've said a lot of what is in chapter 14, that we need to choose our children over everything else, over the phone, over the business meeting, over the I'm going to be late, over just all the things. And really take those moments, those 10 minutes here and there to reclaim that relationship.
Yep.
And on page 200, there's a quote that talks about the fact that the real harm is when we neglect to recollect our child, or our actions say that the relationship is not important to us. But again, it's not about condoning misbehavior or them being peer oriented. It's not about condoning when we take a step back and eat a piece of humble pie. It's about creating the space to recollect them. And that's what this is really about, is what to do to
Right.
make the space for them to
It
come back if
reminds
that's
me,
the situation you're in. Yeah.
sorry, I now
Go ahead.
interrupted you, but we're riffing here. It reminded me of, what parents sometimes do when their teens are going to a party where they think there might be something going on, like drinking or drugs. And it's giving the child this message of, somebody posted, I think, I don't know where I saw this, if it was something we were talking about. No, I think it was a separate group. It said my 18-year-old's going to be going to this party at some Airbnb, and what do I do? There's going to be drinking there. And a lot of parents said it's like, kind of at this point now, you can't totally prevent the child from going. However, you can remind them that, don't be the designated driver, for example. So don't be
Yep.
drinking. Or if the other part that parents say is, call me and I'll be there.
Yep.
No
Without any
questions, no
questions.
judgment, nothing. Just call me, I'll show up. So it's this, that to me is like being there and holding back the critical words at those times, or negative emotions or consequences, because that's a great opportunity to connect to your child in that moment of need. And every time, you and I probably have done that as parents, Nikki, didn't that just, like, even if it felt really horrible in the moment, if your child did something that you were like pulling them from, in the end, I know 100% of the time it has connected me with them in a much deeper way.
Yes. And my kids are a little bit young for me to get that phone call, but I look forward to that phone call, because that, I think, will make it all worth it. But they
Mhm.
knew that they could call me. I
Yeah.
think that's all any parent really wants, is to know that their children know that you will always be there to keep them safe, no matter their age.
And I think it's the sense of, like, you're not condoning the misconduct. Like, I want to be clear about that. Um, it's just, it's a recognition. The way that the authors describe it is that it's not an attachment problem. It's more of a maturity problem that the child is unable to deliver right now. So a lot of times when these things happen, we get really frustrated with our children. Why can't they do this? Why haven't they figured this out? Because
So to
maturity.
clarify what the author was saying, the attachment problem versus the maturity problem, an attachment problem is when your child is unwilling
Mhm.
to deliver. But a maturity problem is when your child is unable to deliver. And that's a big distinction,
Yeah.
right? Unable to deliver versus unwilling is huge. So I think it boils down to affirming the value of your child. Always, always, always. They are important to me. My eyes light up every time you enter the room. Um, when I come and pick you up from school, my cell phone is put away, because that moment is so important to me, that we are reconnecting. Just all of
Yeah.
those little things, don't take your relationship for granted, not with your children, not with your spouse. Just make an effort to be a good
True.
human.
And the idea is, like, if there is a moment where the child feels wounded or hurt and withdraws, right? And if they're feeling the rejection or alienation, what'll happen is if we're not there, that just pushes them into peer oriented situation, right? So staying open and not delivering like an ultimatum when you're angry, right? These are things that seem like so common sense as parents when you're not in that mode, right? It's really trying to control us when we are in that space of frustration.
So this right over here. Oops. Oh, I ripped it. I have this Post-it note that I got when I first started with Mad to Glad. And it says, calm body, calm voice, calm face. And I keep it. I have one in my classroom. I have one at home. I used to keep one on the fridge until it kind of got embedded in my brain. And it just reminds me that it's not about me, it's about the children. Um, and that it's my job to always assure them that I'm a safe space.
Mhm.
And that means that the ego needs to take a back door. And no matter how you're feeling or what's going on or how they are triggering you, it's still our job to maintain, that softer tone, soft touch, soft eyes, just again, the word nest is my word today, just being that nest for them to come to in comfort. So that they can be their best selves out in the world, right? The world is not always easy. And I think that's really what this book is all about
Become our
is,
little child. That's what.
yeah, exactly. No matter
So
their age.
I
And
think,
it also go ahead.
no, finish.
It also talks about connection, right? And it's again, it seems so simple that it's not even something to acknowledge but when you really think about it, the deepest connection you can have with another human is intimacy. And that 10 minutes early in the morning just to start the day, that meeting you with sparkle in my eyes because I'm so happy to see you. It doesn't take long. It takes literally a minute, 10 minutes, 1 minute here and there, is so important because otherwise it boils down to that child feeling like they're not important. And then, the bricks start building. I'm not important. I'm not important. I'm going to
Mhm.
protect myself.
Mhm.
So it's not easy being a parent. It takes a lot of bravery, a lot of courage, but it's also about being intentional
Yeah.
and to hold space rather than forcing something, because even the most difficult children need to be parented, and it just takes time to reclaim them.
That kind of makes me kind of go to the next part. We're not saying just be these easy breezy parents at all the
No.
times. You do need to pose restrictions, right? And we had talked about the hierarchy of parents in our last part, but it's the sense that as you are making these connections, as you're building these, like, we call them the emotional deposits in their bank accounts and their emotional bank accounts, or making these like little deposits over time. So not only does that help preserve the relationship, but when it comes time for you to impose some restrictions, which is highly needed, then because you've built the connection part, because you have an understanding of your child and they understand your expectations and your values, um, it will hopefully be a little bit smoother once you've crossed that bridge, right? And so I thought like there was a part, it's on page 207, I wanted to highlight, which
Mhm.
is something we do. This is similar to like what we said earlier, that, when we arrange all these play dates because of societal norms now, that you think this is the only way to go. I just thought like this idea that they talked about of taking friends on vacation because, parents aren't cool enough and
What?
your
I
child's going to
could
be
never have done
bored.
that when I was growing up.
Exactly, exactly. I do recall like once or twice where a friend would go somewhere and then the parents of that child would take another friend on a vacation because the child's going to be bored with the parents.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
this is something that they highlight, like what's happening and why that's not a good idea
So let me
is
get this right. The the family's going on vacation and the parents are like, I don't want to have to take care of my kids. I'm going to send them to the child care. We're going to invite a friend so they have someone to play with so I don't have to parent while I'm on vacation. Well, that is not a family vacation then. Why are you bringing your children?
Right. And so
Oh
the
my goodness.
idea, like, why do you plan vacations? It's usually to build bonding experiences, to connect with your loved ones, right? And so it can work like if the intention behind it, look, there's like camps, right? Families go to family camps and children and adults go to different areas. That's very common in like the youth group, church group culture too, right? So it's interesting because this part was highlighted, but I think like I'm thinking about this sense of where you're going on a vacation or a trip with your family, and because your children are so disconnected with you already, because maybe they're in the teen years, you've got to bring, I said drag, but I'm saying bring a friend along, because you're a drag as a parent, like they're not going to be interested. And so what that's doing when that happens is, if you've had to do that, this, we're not trying to shame or blame or anything, but is
No.
this, and it's like, think about if you've actually done that, how much quality time did you get with your child? Right. So
Away
sometimes you
from
might,
the regular 9 to 5, the regular.
exactly, you didn't gain any extra like bonding time with them because you have another child there. And we're not saying it can't work at all times. There are times and exceptions to everything, right? But this idea is, a society's gotten so used to not spending time with their parents, children, like especially teens and young adults, not spending time. They always have to bring a friend along. And they kind of said, don't do that, which I found really interesting, right?
I don't know. I feel like I want to bring back family mealtime every day. That's
That
what
was
I
also
feel
another
like.
thing recommended, right, in
Yeah.
this book, that one of the most effective ways to connect with your children and collect them is to have a sit down family meal. And I felt the same, like I need to bring it back into my routines.
Food is the way to the heart. That's what they say.
Mhm.
I think what's kind of coming up for me in all of this is, you mentioned this is not intended to shame or blame. I acknowledge that, but I think there's something else that needs to be spoken, and that's about, oh, self-care, take a bubble bath. Yeah, self-care isn't always easy, but there's something about um taking care of ourselves. This sounds selfish, but it kind of is selfish. If you are not well, if you are not taken care of, if your needs are not met, you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't be there for your children and be the calm body, calm voice, calm face. You can't hold on to your children if you're not safe, right? And I mean, again, there's always exceptions to that, but it's the intention, right? And I keep going back to something that really stuck with me earlier in this book was when they talked about children who had parents who perhaps struggled with, addiction or mental health and things like that, and how those children coped. It's not that they didn't love their parents or value the time that they spent with their parents, right? So there's this dichotomy where there's the time and the nurturing of the relationship, and then there's also the being able to be there for your children, especially when times get tough. So I just think that that needs to be said because that is not easy, especially in our culture. We are so busy and on all the time. I would do anything to go on a vacation where everything was I was waited on and I just had me and my 2 kids in a bed. Oh my gosh, we'd have the best time. I think I need to make space for that in everyday life.
Exactly. Like again, even like when we look at excursions that we take, a lot of this idea is fill it up with itinerary and agendas and things we got to do, from get up early and run, 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 run. And so in that, if that's how you want to set it up, okay, make sure you create opportunities to connect,
Yeah.
pause, right, with your kid, and just kind of talk
Flow.
through,
Yeah.
talk through.
And give them an opportunity to open up too, right? Especially if it's not something that they have been doing. Gotta leave space for connection. Okay. Chapter 16 is called Discipline That Does Not Divide. And I really like the ending, that does not divide. Um, and I know in our culture they talk about timeouts and corporal punishment and all of those things. And I'm gonna call on Magic Lad again. This is why I love Magic Lad, because Magic Lad talks about time in rather than time out. What does that mean? It means when your child is is at their worst, or having a problem, or in the moment of emotion, being there, again, that nest comes up for me, being there, being that safe space, saying, do you need do you need me to hold you, touch you, hug you? Do you need me to be here next to you? Do you want to sit by me? Do you want me to be just, a little bit away from you? Do you want me to be in the same room? Do you want me to be just outside this door? What do you need from me to help me hold space for you? So, discipline that does not divide is, near and dear to my heart, especially as an educator, because oh my goodness, there are so many different administrators who do things so differently, and then parents are doing things differently, and it's just so confusing for children.
It really is.
And yeah, there's just so
Um,
many loaded. Go for it.
the
Go
the
ahead.
phrase that popped up in this part of the book that really connected um, is connection before redirection. And in positive discipline program, it's connection before correction. So I really like the author's connection before redirection. It's saying
Absolutely.
like before you give a redirect or a command or guidance or direction, make sure you're connected with them first instead of just being, go do this. I told you that, like just basically connecting. And so it talks about that when problems occur, the relationship, like focus on the relationship, not the incident. And
Right.
this is so hard, like we're just telling you as if it's so easy to do, but this idea of, don't take it personally, because when we take it personally, it just it's visible, right? They can feel it. They can feel the energy shift versus when you are still, you can express your emotions, but at the same time, really focusing on the incident,
Mhm.
you know.
And avoiding an emotional hardening is one of the things that they mentioned, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
if you go into the authoritarian mode and you do as I say, um, that changes the entire dynamic, which is not what they're teaching us in this book.
yeah.
This book talks about the 7 principles of discipline, which I encourage you to take a look at. I don't think we need to go through each of them, but I do like the very last one, which is what you were kind of talking about.
Yeah.
Work on the relationship. Don't take things personally when they voice their emotions, but acknowledge the emotions, right?
Mhm.
So you wanted me to say yes, but da 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 da, right? Page 222 talks about the adaptation dance. And what that is it helps move children from frustration to sadness so that they can learn the lesson of whatever the situation is. And there were a few example. Um, do you remember any of those, Uzma, or should we just
Let me
take a
kind of
look at
look
page
at that.
222?
Mhm.
I thought this was important because, when we're
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about children being peer oriented, it's all about the lack of connection, the lack of emotion, right? I'm not getting it from you, parents, so I'm going to go there and get it from them, the peers. So, this idea of making them feel the frustration and feel the sadness in the safe space of you is what the authors are suggesting is the best way to go about doing that.
Draw out the tears, which sounds so mean when you hear that phrase. Like,
Mhm.
that's not kind. But it's this sense of it's going to connect them to you,
Yeah.
because you're basically acknowledging and saying, if a child's upset, it's because plans got changed and grandma's not coming, you say, grandma can't come. And that's
Yeah.
an example of
That
drawing
makes
out.
you upset that grandma can't come.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Grandma can't
understand.
come. And that makes you upset. It's like without emotion, without sarcasm, and putting some sadness in your voice.
Mhm.
So when you do that, I know grandma can't come,
You're validating
making you
emotion.
sad. I can see that, right? Just something like that in a calm voice, right? Calm face. Um, it's going to bring out those emotions, and your child may cry then, right?
But you're there for them.
Yeah, if you don't
Therefore, they are
sense the
dependent
crying.
on you, which is the point. One of the headings on page 223 is to solicit good intentions instead of demanding good behavior. And I think that really speaks to what we're talking about. Um,
Well, we talked a ton.
We really, really did.
Still
I
here
also
with
want to
us.
I want to pull out something that is my my problem.
Hmm.
As a Virgo and as an educator, I talk a lot all the time. If you don't understand something, I can explain it from beginning to end and I'll give you a PhD. I'm kidding, but a little sarcastic there. But what Samantha Moe calls that is overteaching with logic. And it just meets the child, goes right over their head, and they tune you out. So again, less words, more connection, right?
Mhm.
Building relationships. The fact that all children, even babies, know when you're inauthentic or being fake or being, sarcasm. Sometimes they just can't read sarcasm. So just really holding space, focusing on connection, making time, and building bridges is really the goal of holding on to your kids. So finally, in part 4, we have found our answer. I can't wait till part 5 and then the part 6, which talks about social media. But Uzma, is there anything that we've missed, or do you think we're
I think we got most of it, the gist of it. We do recommend you read through part 4. If you can't read other parts, this is the part to read. And I really enjoyed it because, and I highlighted so many key points. The way that they wrote this chapter, these 3 chapters is powerful. So I learned a lot and I encourage you to read it. Our next call is going to be on September 10th. And we're going to talk about part 5, don't court the competition and recreate the attachment village.
Ooh, I like that. Awesome. So same time, 11 Central, noon Eastern, or 9 Pacific. We look forward to seeing you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.